Chaos. A lot of commotion. I remember right where I was when you started hearing this commotion on the radio.
Well, it's just how we need more rescues. We got at least a couple hundred people to be burned, at least another 100 inside.
You could tell that whatever this guy was seeing, when you heard it on the radio, you knew it was bad.
We are fully engulfed building. We have people on fire inside. Fire apparatus is on scene.
I've always said, being a firefighter was the greatest job in the world. It's just sometimes you wish you weren't working. My issues and my evils from that night are my own. Somehow, for me, it was very quiet. We were relegated to taking our stretcher and going and standing at the front door of the station nightclub and waiting for the next victim. Our stretcher and ourselves, myself and my partner, were standing there watching the firefighters working not 10 feet from us. And they were pulling bodies out with ropes. They were reaching in, lassoing them, and just pulling. And as bodies would come out, they would, they had trouble trying to get them to the area that was marked as the morgue, temporary morgue, which was nothing more than a tarp laid on the ground. And the stretcher was in such a way that as they dragged them over the hood of one car, they would use the stretcher for the bridge to get them over to the hood of the other car to get them over to drag them over to the morgue area. The rule is pulseless and breathless in a mass casualty are not viable. And the hardest part for me at that point was standing there waiting for a, quote, viable victim and watching all of these individuals laying on a tarp. And they didn't look that bad. As you looked over that night and being in the winter and the bodies were on the ground and they were steaming and you would look and you'd say, is that a breath? And you were hoping and you knew you couldn't go over there. You knew you had to stand right there and do what you had to do. You had to wait for someone to come out with a pulse and a breath. And that wasn't happening until Linda came up. And the young guy just stopped in this look in his eyes and he said, it moved. And I looked and I said back, no, it didn't. And it was the first time I had referred to anyone as an it, but you couldn't tell. You could see it was obviously a person, but the injuries were such that you couldn't decipher male from female. And then they were arguing that it hadn't moved. And then she just reared her head and made this sound, trying to tell us that, that she was alive. And I was like, oh God. So we got her in the truck, and I remember David saying to me from the front, we're not getting out of here. We were blocked in. Her injuries were primarily head. Her left arm was burnt, pretty much her hand was gone. Her ears were not noticeable. She had no hair left. To my disbelief and amazement, when we were cutting her clothes, she reached behind her and tried to cover herself, which told me that she knew exactly what was going on. And the fact that she could know what was going on and know that she was holding my hand was I couldn't comprehend, because I couldn't imagine, and I hate to say this, but I couldn't imagine the brain surviving that kind of heat in the skull. Just that alone, never, let alone what she inhaled, let alone, you know, the amount of burns she had. So my ride was where I sat on the floor because her head was down, and I knew she couldn't see me, but I just wanted somehow for her to know that I was close. And sat on the floor, and like I said, I was injecting her with one hand, I was holding her hand with my other. And then I was praying. And I was praying that someone wasn't going to make it. I remember that feeling of just looking at the totality of this young woman's injuries and the fact that modern medicine is where it's at. The potential of her surviving this was greater than I had wanted it to be. And I know that sounds terrible, but she needed to be comfortable. We needed to be there. You know, she needed to be out of there 10 or 15 minutes sooner. Or we needed to be there 5 minutes later. And I'd never prayed like that before. And it's a hard thing to swallow, even to this day, to imagine dedicating my career to helping people and praying sitting on the floor praying that someone would go. It's not something that you usually do. My faith has wandered. I have a hard time now thinking of God in heaven